On this week's Revved Up Reflections, I'm just going to talk about valve adjustment. I'm not actually doing a valve adjustment on this because I've already done this one. Going back together with it here shortly. I had somebody asking about why I run more clearance on the exhaust and what the manufacturer recommends on the exhaust valve clearances. Racing stuff, I always run it a little bit looser, especially on the exhaust. Gives the valves a little bit more time to cool off, because the way a valve cools is it actually transfers heat from the valve into the seat and then dissipates it through the head. So just always run a little bit more. Say it's supposed to be 0.006 is what they say. I might run 8, 7 or 8. Intakes almost always run the exact of what the manufacturer recommends. But a lot of people don't even bother adjusting their valves or even checking them. What happens is the valves, as the faces of valves wear, the valve it comes up in the head and it actually loses clearance. And once it starts losing clearance, especially on the exhaust valve, it'll burn the crap out of the face of the valves in pretty short order, especially something you're revving the crap out of. And that's not the reason why I run more clearance. Like, I run more clearance because I want the valves to cool off. A good path to cool off. I have had before. I did one time. Guy brings, I want to say it was CBR 600 F2 or F3, something like that, and brings it in. And once the valve's checked, it'd been 15, 16, 17,000 miles since he had them done last. And he's got a work order from the place he did it from. The last time they did it, they charged him for it. And this place had a tendency to do work and charge for it and then not actually do the work. In this case, though, I pulled, motor's good and stone cold like it should be. But, I dropped it off. I let it sit overnight. And pulled the valve cover off, pulled the plugs out. So I go to adjust the valves. I got the valve cover off. And on the trough next to where the chain runs through, I'm in there checking, spinning the motor over and checking the valves. And I get to the side where the chain is, right in the valley next to where the chain is, where the cam chain is. I had to take a light and shine in there because there's a damn feeler gauge laying in the valley, like right next to where the cam chain is. I was like, man, it's a good thing that thing didn't fly out of there and go down the chain tunnel. That'd have been pretty bad news. So took it out, and it was just a go no gear feeler gauge laying in there. I pulled it out and did the valve adjustment, and measure them all. The way I do it, I take a legal pad or a piece of paper and I draw out each cylinder with each valve, and then I write down the clearance. I write down, when I take it apart, I'll measure the shim with a mic and write down the measurement for the shim, so I'll know which shim I need to go back with to get the right clearance. And then I'll go through there with the shims, and if I can swap shims out between different valves, I will. And then I'll go to my shim box and do them. Pull whatever shims I need that he needs that aren't in there. And then I'll keep whatever shims I took out, because usually there's nothing wrong with them. Not always, but usually there's nothing wrong with them. Sometimes, though, you get one that's got where it's been riding on the valve tip, and you can run a micrometer on there, and it'll have a little divot right in there where it's starting to wear the hardness through. Well, you can just throw those in the trash because they ain't going to be no good. Certain bikes, like older Ironhead Sportsters, there's no way to really check them. With those, you put it on the heel of the cam for that cylinder, and you feel the push rod, and that is definitely a feel thing. So you don't want any up and down, no shake side to side, but you need to be able to roll it. and that supposedly gives you enough clearance, because there's no way to actually check the clearance other than we adjust the push rods like this, other than experience. You can run them a little bit looser, you can run them no tighter, but a little bit looser. It's just going to make more noise. But really, that's about it. Now, these things here, this particular motor, this is CX500 Honda, and it's got push rods. They're little teeny short push rods because the cam's only right down here in the tunnel. They're not real long push rods, not like on a Harley or a V8 or anything. They're little short push rods. But you got your adjusters up here, your regular adjusters, like on older bikes would have. So with these, you need to check each individual valve and then set it. And I don't remember what the spec is on this thing. I know I've got it written down somewhere, but that's neither here nor there. So feeler gauges it's definitely a feel thing. In other words, if I stick a feeler gauge in here, and let's say it's 2000s, just for an example. Well, I can gauge what 2000s feels like, whether it's right or not. I've had guys before at a shop where I tell them to check it, and I'll go back and check them after they're done. They did it, or they might ask me to come over and check it, and I'll go over there and I can fit 2 in there, I can fit a 4 in there, I can fit a 5 in there, because they're just not sure how much pressure they're supposed to have in there. That is definitely a feel thing. Some bikes, I just had a guy thinking about buying a bike, V-Star 1100, and I asked him how many miles are on it. I told him, man, you need to ask the owner if it's ever had a valve adjustment. And then he's like, how much is a valve adjustment? And I told him, I was like, man, those bikes, you need to religiously keep up on those, because half of them will have a damn mess running around, and there won't be anything to do with the damn carburation. Valves will be tight because they're worn. They've done receded up into the head somewhat, so valves aren't actually closing all the way. Regardless of that, he ended up not buying the bike because guy had no idea if it's ever been done. And he's the original owner, and it had 40,000 miles on it or whatever. And if you've never adjusted valves in 40,000 miles, you haven't really been taking care of your bike at all. So other than that, check your, when it says to check your valve adjustment, you need to check it. Typically what I do, if I buy a bike that actually has adjustable valves in it, I'll want to check them before I do a whole lot of work to it. This thing, this bike here only had, I want to say 12,000 miles, right around 10,000 miles on it. CX500 we bought used, it didn't run, and got it running just to make sure it would actually fire up and run. And you had it running in probably a half hour, and then did a valve adjustment on it, and they were close, but they weren't quite right on this bike. And then left head gasket was pumping oil out of it pretty much, so it got torn down at that point. But check your valve adjustments. For whatever reason, probably because people that buy them aren't real keen on doing maintenance, is like stuff on sport bikes, where they've been beating the crap out of the motor on it. They've been shifting when the oil light comes on, or you hear them guys all the time banging off the damn rev limiter, not even riding the bike, just sitting there holding the damn throttle wide open until it's da 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 da. Well, that's really bad for the damn valves. But you got to realize most of those guys are probably young, and they don't really give a shit. They're not interested in keeping the bike for any amount of time. Just the excitement. I got a bike, and I'm going to beat the crap out of it, which is whatever. I know this is pretty dry stuff. It's just maintenance. If you got a bike and you should be doing valve adjustments on it, unless it's a Harley, and those are hydraulic lifters, and a lot of other stuff uses hydraulic lifters. I know with that BMW R80 RT that we bought, it had a few problems with it when we got it. Got it cheap. It was running on one cylinder, and what that was one of the spark plug wires was the resistor caps were fried, so it was only running on one cylinder. It didn't run quite right. Once we fired up, I pulled the valve covers off, and both cylinders valves were tight. Intakes and exhausts were as tight as could be, like no clearance whatsoever, especially on the right cylinder. Was horrible. I kept screwing the adjuster nut out, and I'm spinning the motor over to check to make sure that I'm on make sure the push rods are going down all the way, so it's actually on the heel of the cam. And it was. They were just valves were sunk deep in the head. Really, that's pretty much all I got. Keep your valves adjusted. It gets rather expensive if you don't. I don't know what they charge now, but trying to find anybody that actually does cylinder head work anymore, good luck. Especially somebody you can trust. Most automotive shops, car machine shops, they're not real interested in doing motorcycle stuff. I used to do a lot of it. And when I say a lot, I was doing cylinder heads pretty much 5 days a week. 4 to 5 days a week, I'd be doing cylinder heads. Because it's nice when you got the equipment, guys would bring, whatever head in. I've done 4-cylinder heads, done Harley heads, done some flathead stuff, Norton, BSA, Triumph, whatever, replacing valve seats, replacing valve guides, replacing valves, springs, all that crap. It's just, and it ain't cheap. It's not like I charge an excessive amount of money, but $50,000 plus piece of machinery ain't going to pay for itself if you're not charging people for it. Especially when you know that nobody else around does them. Nobody within a 4 or 5 state area does them, at least halfway decent. Anyway, for a decent price. I like doing cylinder head work, but that's neither here nor there. We're talking about valve adjustment. So, I keep reiterating this. Point is, check your valve adjustment. It's there in the owner's manual or the service manual for a reason. You should be checking it. Or, like I said before, it can get expensive to fix. And some stuff, you can't get parts for anymore. So if you burn, these things are cheap. This particular bike right here is cheap. But, say this was obsolete cylinder head. Or, I had the guy bring me a cylinder head one time that was off, actually it was a flathead from some brand of bike I ain't never heard of. And it was a flathead. Somebody had run it with valves not adjusted. It burnt the valves and burnt the head where the seat is, burnt the area in the seat, and there was no saving that cylinder. Well, I saved it because boarded, put it up in the 30, counterboard it, and ended up putting seats in it, so it had real seats. But nobody makes that stuff for a bike that's pre 1930. I want to say this was a 1920s bike, and maybe it started with a C. It might have been a Cleveland or a Crocker or something along those lines. But basically, nobody made parts for it. So what I ended up doing was buying stainless steel valve blanks, cutting the valve blanks down to the sizes I needed, buying some seat material, valve seat material, cutting it down in the lathe, counterbore in the head, or counterbore in the cylinder to put the seats in. And same with the guides, had the manufacturer guides for it. But yeah, that was not just because it was old. That was, you know, when the guy brought the bike, he actually brought the bike with the motor, and valves were just as freaking tight as could be. You know, and that shit, where you run them that tight, you're gonna wear the cam out too, especially any kind of RPM. And I got to tell you, that's pretty much it for this revved up reflections.